over their viewpoint on this chapter. And it is still a bone of contention. The details in this prophecy are broad, sweeping, and they ascend all the way up to the throne of God, where Christ is now presenting himself in our behalf. And a lot of it had to do with our pioneers who were studying the King James Version. There are words in Daniel chapter 8, which we now know have meanings that are not represented in the King James Version. And the King James translators were doing their best, and there are reasons why they translated the way they did. Part of it had to do with their own presuppositions as to what they thought the chapter meant, and interpreted it, translated it accordingly. But over the past 150, actually longer than this, but for Seventh-day Adventists, over the past 160 or so years, we just keep on studying and studying and studying. And there is a growing consensus that I'm going to share with you tonight that I believe is correct. And if we had accepted the consensus back in the 1980s, there are hundreds of pastors who would still be serving the church, teachers, but we took hard and fast stands. Has to be this way, this way. No, it has to be this way. When we know full well now, looking at Bible prophecy, that it is rich in layers. And we know this especially from the book of Revelation, because in the book of Revelation, which helps interpret what we're going to study tonight, which was basically ignored back in the early days of our pioneers, that what the book of Revelation does, he pulls together all of the messianic allusions in the Old Testament and first century Judaism, and he collected them all and wove them into this tapestry that is the book of Revelation. And he used the book of Daniel as an outline. And he used Ezekiel and Zechariah and the Psalms and Isaiah, collected them all, and gave us the book of Revelation as we have it now. So, I'm going to tell you a story. Once upon a time, in the golden years of yesteryore, there was a Greek king who arose to power, and he was so popular. His father's name was Philip. His name was Alexander, and he conquered the then known world. He got as far east as the Indus River in India. He got as far south as the Sudan in Egypt. He got as far west as Greece. He did not touch Rome. Everything he did was east, south, and, of course, the promised land, the glorious land, the land of promise, the land of Israel, which is nestled in the middle of all that. Well, unfortunately, as often happens to absolute rulers, his rulership came to an end. And now what are they going to do with his empire? After some arguing and tussling and a little bit of fighting, the empire was divided among 4 of Alexander's generals. There was Lysimachus, Cassiodorus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. The 2, Lysander and so on, they were on the west end. Lysander had Greece, basically, and the next one had just a little bit of the west part of Turkey, what is now Turkey. And then Seleucus, he had all of the northern portion from middle of Turkey, Asia Minor, all the way to the Indus River. His empire was equal in size to the Persian Empire that Alexander the Great conquered. Then to the south was Ptolemy, who took over Egypt, which was the second largest portion. Well, there were Seleucus 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then there was Antiochus 1, 2, 3, and so on. Finally, we come to the fourth, Antiochus the fourth. And he loved the Greek religion. Loved it so much that he became the supreme evangelist to spread the Greek principles and love of the arts and sculpture to all of his realm, which he did, and most of the people in his realm went along with him. And the Seleucid Empire was basically Greece, all the way to the west side of India, all the way through Palestine, down to the borders of Egypt, where Ptolemies were. And there was Ptolemy I, Ptolemy II. They were really creative people back then, kept naming their sons after themselves with all due humility, as you can tell. Well, it so happened that at one point, we know that Antiochus IV was born around 215 BC. He ascended to the throne in 175 BC. In those years between 215 and 175, his father, Antiochus III, the Great, with all due humility, sent his son to Rome as a hostage, much like Daniel was sent from Israel to Babylon to be a hostage, to guarantee the agreements between them. Antiochus IV grew up in Rome. He was raised in the Roman Senate. But Antiochus the Great, the third, turned out to be human after all, and he died. And Antiochus IV duked it out with a brother and won, and he ascended to the throne of the whole Seleucid Empire in 175. Well, he did a good job of spreading his religion, but the Ptolemies down there in Egypt, one died and the next one was a kid. Ptolemy Eupator was a kid. He wasn't even a teenager yet. And they, in order to maintain the purity of the dynasty, they married him to his sister Cleopatra. The first, not the one that Mark Antony dallied with. This is an earlier one. So here were these two preteens. They were now ruling the Ptolemaic Empire, the Empire of Egypt. Antiochus looked at that and says, I need that country. Those poor little kids need a mentor. I think I'll go down and help them. Quote. So he came down with his army and surrounded the city of Pelusium, which is east of Alexandria, the capital. And as luck would have it, the armies of the teenagers won, much to the shame of Antiochus IV. Now you need to understand something about his character. There was a man named Polybius who wrote a batch of histories around the Mediterranean region, and he knew Antiochus IV personally. They were good friends. And Polybius wrote about Antiochus. And he wrote about his faith and the way he ruled and what a generous person he was. Antiochus, for example, when he heard that there was a party going on somewhere in his capital which was humbly named after himself, Antioch. That's where Paul staged his ministry later on, same town. He would dress up as a peasant or as one of the commoners and crash the party. And of course, everybody played along. Oh, who is that? They all knew who he was, and they talk about it. In fact, his nickname that he gave himself was Antiochus IV Epiphanes, the divine revelation. He saw himself as a personification of the Greek god Zeus. And he began demanding worship. Well, as he was on his way down to Egypt, on his way to Pelusium, he auctioned off the high priesthood in Jerusalem to the highest bidder. And the one who won, much to the chagrin of the one who was legitimate, became the high priest in Jerusalem. Antiochus got down to Pelusium. He lost. He was angry. And rumor had it that he had died at the Battle of Pelusium. And so Menelaus, the legitimate high priest, assassinated Jason, the one who was the highest bidder, and they staged a rebellion there. When Antiochus got there and found out that his favorite had been assassinated, he immediately assassinated Menelaus and put another one, Onias, in his place, next highest bidder. And then he needed to pay his army. And there was all this gold and silver in the temple. And he stripped it all, left it down to the bare rocks.
Which temple?
In Jerusalem.
The one that later we called Herod's temple.
Herod's temple later on. The second temple. Yes. Yeah. And the one that Ezra and Nehemiah. Yeah. You got it. Yep. So, not only that, he massacred several thousand Jews who had sided with Menelaus. It was a bloodthirsty thing. And the Jews, as they saw this man march into their temple, he defiled the temple with his presence. He was a pagan potentate. He parked his own image in the most holy place. I am Zeus. I am God. I belong here. Well, he left. They kept battling it out, and he sent emissaries to collect taxes 2 years later, and the Jews in rebellion refused to pay them. So Antiochus came down again, but on the way he decided to try again to pick up Egypt. And he went down past Jerusalem, he actually surrounded Alexandria. And the little Ptolemy boy, who's now an early teen, sent an emissary to the Roman Senate begging for help. The Roman Senate chose one of their number, Gaius Linus Popilius, Roman senator, to go down and tell Antiochus IV, go home, or we'll deal with you. Remember that Antiochus had been raised in Rome. He knew what Rome was capable of, even at that early time. Now here's what happened. Popilius took his old time. He settled an issue up in Asia, another one in Dalmatia. Finally, he boarded a boat, came down to Alexandria. And of course, Antiochus IV knew him. And as he's running his army, they got the place surrounded. They got the siege. They're starving in the city of Alexandria. Antiochus saw Popilius coming. Hi, Popey! And he comes up, wants to shake his hand. And Popilius stopped and took his senatorial staff and drew a circle around Antiochus IV and said, "You may not step out of that circle until you decide to go home." Talk about embarrassment. It's one man, maybe a couple of his helpers, servants, one man. You may not step out of that circle until you've decided to go home. Well, Antiochus, according to Polybius, who recorded this, as well as the Maccabees, as well as Josephus, and even recorded by Eusebius in the 4th century, he stammered and hemmed and hawed, says, "Well, let me think about it." And Polybius said, "No, you answer now." So he looked around. Here was his army. They got the place surrounded. Part of his entourage, they were riding elephants, archers on elephants. They were the tanks of the day. And wouldn't you know it, for whatever reason, Antiochus IV said, "Okay." Stepped out of the circle, gathered his armies, and started going back to Antioch. On the way was Jerusalem. They had been rebelling. They refused to pay the taxes, the tribute that was deserving to him, according to him. And so he marched into the city and said, "From now on, you're going to practice the Greek religion." And he built an altar on the altar of sacrifice, the altar of burning, on top of it. A pagan altar. And he hauled a pig and slaughtered it and offered it as a sacrifice on the sacred sin offering altar. And the blood of it trickled down onto the sacred stones. Pig's blood. That happened in 168 BC. That was the last straw. Antiochus sent emissaries out to every town in Palestine with an altar, a portable altar. Set it up in the center of town. And all the citizens were supposed to line up and sacrifice a pig to the genius of the representative of Zeus, Antiochus IV. They got to the town of Modi'in, where a priest named Mattathias lived. He often served as high priest, but he'd been deposed under all of the shenanigans here. He and his 5 sons watched, and here was the altar. Here was the town. The townspeople were gathered there, and everybody's hesitating. And the soldiers are saying, "Come now, who will be the first?" Finally, one man in Modi'in walked forward, grabbed the knife, slaughtered a pig, and as he began to place it on the altar, Mattathias had had enough. "Israel, rise up!" And he killed the man and the soldiers and destroyed the altar. And thus began the Maccabean revolt. And for the next several years, it was a bloody guerrilla warfare. And the Maccabees kept on winning. Until finally in 165 BC, they had driven out all of the Hellenistic Antiochian soldiers, sent them packing out of the land, and they cleansed the temple. They scrubbed it down. But there was a problem. The altar had been defiled with pig's blood. They smashed the altar of Antiochus, carried the rubble out and dumped it in the Vale of Hinnom, the garbage dump. They didn't know what to do with it because it's holy. Can pig's blood destroy holiness, or does holiness sanctify the pig's blood? They couldn't answer. So they carefully disassembled that tainted altar. There was a kitchen on the northeast corner of the Temple Mount where they cooked meals for the priests. They turned it into a storeroom, and they carefully put each of the stones with the pig's blood stains on them into that room and sealed it off until the Messiah would come and tell them what to do with it. Well, Antiochus was still trying to conquer countries. He needed to pay his army. He heard that there was a bunch of gold in a town called Elymais on the east side off towards India that had lots of gold. So he took his armies and surrounded Elymais, and wouldn't you know it, those barbarians defeated him. And he went home back to Antioch with his tail tucked between his legs. And according to Maccabees and Polybius and Josephus, he went crazy into deep depression and died in the desert. The end. Picture a couple hundred years later, Jesus is standing in Solomon's porch in John chapter 10. You know, when the Maccabees finally cleansed the temple, the Jews to this day celebrate a feast. They have a celebration honoring the fact that they got the temple back. It's called Hanukkah. Hanukkah is the celebration of the Maccabean victories over Antiochus IV. Epimanes, that's their nickname, the nutcase. Not Epiphanes, Epimanes. So close. They made a pun out of it. The nutcase. So Jesus was teaching in the temple, and finally, John just says it was the Feast of Dedication. That's Hanukkah. So the people are there celebrating Hanukkah. It involves 8 candles and so on. 8 days of celebration. There was another Passover taking place in the month of Kislev, which is normally in November or December, somewhere in there. So on the 25th of Kislev, Hanukkah begins. And the Jews came to him and said, "Tell us plainly, are you the Messiah?" Keep in mind that Jesus was standing in Solomon's portico right over that kitchen with the rocks. So you understand why they were demanding, "Are you the Messiah?" Because if he is, he's going to tell them what to do with those bloody rocks. And Jesus says, "My sheep hear my voice, they follow me, and I give them eternal life. And no one is able to pluck them out of my hands. My Father who gave them to me is greater than them all, and no one is able to pluck them out of his hands. I and my Father are one." Jesus said that over that little kitchen. And his point was, those rocks no longer matter, because just a few weeks he was going to Calvary and die for the sins of the whole world once for all. And those rocks were irrelevant. How do you like that story?
Excellent story.
Yeah. So, We get to Daniel chapter 8. And the argument that has taken place in our denomination is that there are a bunch of us who see Antiochus really fits the description here. Yes. Over the daily. Yes. That was part of it. And there are those of us who say, well, the 2,300 days, those are actually years. And we know when the beginning of that is when the decree went out in Daniel chapter 9 to rebuild. So you calculate, and that takes us to 1844. Then there's a bunch of us who say both of those are right. Because Paul in 2 Thessalonians describes the man of sin who sets himself up as God, demands worship. And there's Isaiah 14:12, I will be. There's this demonic entity. And obviously, Antiochus in his career exemplified all of that. Mothers with newborn babies, they came to the temple to have them circumcised, and they were arrested, and their babies were slaughtered. They hung the corpses over the mothers' necks, and then they hung them over the wall of the temple, left them dangling there as a warning to all, because circumcision was forbidden. Sabbath worship was forbidden. Everything we talk about happening just before Christ returns, Antiochus was doing. Everything. So for that reason, many of us, myself included, view Antiochus as a forerunner, a type of the Antichrist yet to come, who will do everything. And I have no problem nailing down 1844 because prophecy, we now know, those of us who know this, is multi-layered. You know, for example, Cyrus, I shared with you last time, how did he conquer Babylon? He dried up the river Euphrates. Revelation chapter 16, you got the 7 last plagues. Where in the Bible do we find plagues? Exodus. What was the purpose of those plagues? To set God's people free. So what are the 7 last plagues for? To set God's people free. And why are they being poured out? Because there is this nasty beast from Daniel 7, which we studied last week, all combined into one, who persecutes the saints like Antiochus did. But then you got this 2-horned beast like a lamb who speaks like the devil. How do we know he's not the lamb? Because of what he says. He talks like the devil. He sets up an image and demands the whole world bow down to it. Well, who did that? 2 people. Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel 3, Antiochus IV. And so here come the 3 angels' messages with the everlasting gospel. Jesus lived. Jesus died. Jesus arose. Jesus ascended. Jesus is coming back. Jesus is Lord of Lords, King of Kings. And he's coming to set us free. And what is his message? Well, first one is Babylon is fallen. Whoa, wait a minute. We just discussed Babylon. Started off in Revelation chapter 11, the 2 witnesses, the beast that arises from the earth, arises from the sea. Then you got the beast from the sea, Revelation 13, empowered by the dragon himself. And that's a composite of Daniel 7. And you got the Son of Man, Daniel chapter 7, verses 9 through 13, going to the Ancient of Days and receiving this kingdom in behalf of God's people. They can't do it, but he can, because he's both God and man. He's the Son of Man. So this is all happening. And so Daniel 8 gives us pictures of all the stuff that happened to God's people, happened to them in World War II, the mass slaughter of 6 million innocent people simply because they were Jews. And that's a foretaste of what's coming. And it's nothing compared to what's coming. When the devil sees that Christ is on his way, he will redouble his efforts. As Ellen White states in Great Controversy, the last great deception is that the devil himself will personate Christ. He will personate Christ's return, and the whole world will accept him, saying, "This is happening. Christ has come. Christ has come." Jesus prophesied it, Matthew 24. You hear false Christs, false prophets. Don't go. They're over here? No. They're over there? No. The Son of Man will split the heavens as lightning goes from east to the west. So shall the coming of the Son of Man be. The devil can't duplicate that. But he shows up and does his thing, performs miracles, calls down fire from heaven, just like that two-horned beast in Revelation 13. And he sets up an image to the beast, the same system of pagan worship, worshiping the image, idol worship. And the whole world has to worship it on pain of death. And the three angels go out, say, Babylon is fallen. And the third one says, if anybody worships that beast or his image or receives his mark, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, poured out without mixture. All of that is contained in Daniel 8. Do you have any questions?
Praise God.
Why?
If it's all contained in Daniel 8,
And 7, and 3, and 2.
it's the needed one.
Yes, it is. And it's going to happen. We see things happening now. We're steadily moving into an autocracy here in this nation. All of the safeguards we've had against dictatorship are falling by the wayside, one by one. But the big one is coming. The one that's trying to conquer everything now, whether it's Putin or Trump or whoever, the Muslims or, whoever it is, they're going to be superseded by the devil himself personating Christ. He looks like the Lamb, but he speaks like the dragon. Yeah.
I've heard of Antiochus being like represented as the little Lord of Daniel 8. Is
Who?
that what
You heard that who?
Antiochus the fourth being the
Yeah.
little horn of Daniel 8, and
Right. Grew out of one of the four horns.
not the papal power.
Well, the papal power epitomizes it. Like I just said, Antiochus is a type by which to interpret future events. That's how a type works. You have this model in miniature, and you use that as a template to interpret future events. And we see that the papacy follows the same pattern. And we see that the devil himself follows the same pattern. Just as the sanctuary is a type, and what Jesus did in his life, death, and resurrection, what he's doing now in his intercession, is typified by the sanctuary. Cyrus the Great is a type of the fall of Babylon in Revelation 16. He's a model in miniature. Isaiah calls him the Messiah in Isaiah 48, verse 1. It says the anointed one. That's the Hebrew word for Messiah. That's why John picks it up and puts it in Revelation 16. What he did back then, which brought down that Babylon, the kings from the east, which are described in Revelation chapter 19, the white rider on a white horse with all of his hosts, King of kings, Lord of lords, the living word, sword of the word in his mouth. He's coming from the sun rising from the east, and he conquers Babylon. And to do that, the river Euphrates, on which Babylon sits, dries up. All those people that support the woman in scarlet, Revelation 17, peoples, nations, tongues, and tribes, they see that they're dead wrong, and they turn on Babylon, chapter 18. It's important for us to see the broad sweep of things that are in these prophecies. Broad sweep.
Meaning, well, what I'm hearing is that it's, well, the spirit that drove Antiochus the Fourth is the same spirit that you see driving the power of the papacy
Yes,
and who knows what other
yes,
powers that
yeah,
contribute
Hitler.
to arise
Yep,
fighting with the people.
that's right.
And where does this put the several mention of 42 weeks and 1260 days and three times and dividing of times, which
Which,
seem to have
again, is multi-layered.
time.
The prophet Elijah, how long was the famine that he called forth? How long was it? 3.5 years. 42 months. 1,260 literal days. How long was Christ's ministry? So does it surprise you that those same numbers would apply to the devil and his minions? Because he is constantly trying to be God, be Christ. That's what those numbers tell us. They're the same periods. So 538 to 1798, 1,260 years, no problem.
So what you're saying is we just have to be open to not necessarily argue one point exclusive of others, but that we have to open our minds to the possibility that this applies to other
Yes.
elements that have the same spirit of rebellion,
Yeah.
spirit of
Now it's clear to me,
anger against the people of
right, when you take the totality of all of those that are similar, the types, when you add them all together, you get the full picture of what will happen, which is covered in the book of Revelation. Everything, all of them, are included in that last day book. If you leave some of them out, you have symbols that don't seem to make sense. Yeah.
But what you hear them preaching is it's been already
Yes,
fulfilled during the time of the honey.
which brings up the principle I'm about to tell you.
That's what they're preaching over here, and then they have all these years of 7 years.
I know. We're going to come into that. when we get into next week. The false interpretations of Daniel 9. And I'll show you how you can, it's obvious once you look at the way it's structured. But that's next week. And, yeah,
And also, for me, non-negotiable is how the 2,300-year prophecy that starts with the 490 years points so clearly to the time of of Christ's arrival and his ministry and his death. And, for me, that's kind of like
so when you,
foundational, by which I interpret anything else
okay,
related to it.
by that, do you mean to say that your understanding is the only one?
Well, I see. I think it's wonderful that we can see how precisely Christ's timing of arrival in this world, was
Yes.
foretold.
Yes.
So, that's another reassurance that Christ was Messiah, because he came when he was supposed to come,
No argument there.
when he was supposed to minister.
There's no argument from me there.
But some people use the
Yes, now here's the problem.
story,
Here's the principle.
muddy that up.
What we affirm, we agree on. What we deny is wrong.
How's that?
They deny that Daniel 9 applies to the Messiah. That's wrong.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that.
But if we deny,
Jurist, I may not understand a lot of things, but that one to me is sure.
yes, however, let me stretch you a little bit. You believe in the 2300 days. We now know that Antiochus' career against the Jews lasted 2,300 literal days. We know this. It's in their writings.
3.5 years.
No, 6 years, 10 months.
300 days, literal days.
His beginning in 170 BC and his death in 164 BC encompasses 2,300 days, literally. So both are true. Don't deny one while accepting the other. Both are true.
They're not exclusive of each.
So don't be exclusive. When you get exclusive, then we get splits. Instead of uniting us on the person and work of Christ, we get bogged down in the pots and pans. I discovered this about 20 years ago. There were two guys arguing in Spectrum magazine, Clifford Goldstein and another guy, I forget who he was, I still have the articles. And they were bantering back and forth whether Antiochus has any role to play in Daniel chapter 8. And I decided, well, I need to check out Antiochus. And I went through every reference I could find in ancient literature, and it was a real eye-opener to me, especially when I calculated when he started his attacks on the Jews, stripped the temple, murdered, assassinated thousands, sacrificed pigs on the altar. You add all that up, he died in November BC 64. We know that. It's written in the Babylonian Chronicles. We can date it. And so, you go back 2,300 literal days, and bingo, you've got when he started. Sorry, it works.
So it's kind of like the 666 applying to, what they call, but then it applies to
It also applies to the Babylonian number system. The Babylonian number system is base 60. Their key numbers are 6, 60, and 600. So he's taken the whole Babylonian number system, and that's the number of the beast and his name. So you got Babylon all through here in those nasties.
But the marvel is that when you take it into other languages, it still is 666.
666,
Yeah,
not 666.
right.
People misunderstand. Got 3 6s in my social security number. Oh no! No, that's not the mark of the beast. Okay, you have the notes there. You can read them on your own. But I thought I would tell you the story to share with you the direction that we are all, most of us are going as we keep on studying and studying and studying and realizing that the whole picture is essential to our understanding of what's coming. The whole picture, not bits and pieces.
And the whole picture is about Christ.
You're singing my song. Any other questions? The wheels are turning. Now, just so you know, if you disagree with me on all this, that's fine. You're not saved by agreeing with Jim Ayers. You're saved by the Savior that I exalt.
Amen.
So stay with him.
All the story is consistent. There's an enemy of Christ who's at war and constantly fighting whatever way.
Yep, through politics usually.
It's not, I'm not surprised that,
A funny thing happened when I was pastor in Ventura. We had an annual citywide Thanksgiving service, and it was interfaith, so people from all the faiths could come together. And one year, several years ago, the first night of Hanukkah happened to be the first night of Thanksgiving. And so, as the cycle would have it, they met in the Ventura Adventist Church that year. So I'm the host. So here's my Jewish friends. One of my best friends was the cantor. His name was Anatol. And the rabbi, she and I had worked on community service projects together, along with other Christian pastors and religions, working together to get the homeless off the streets. And so, knowing that it was the first night of Hanukkah as well as Thanksgiving, I introduced the cantor who's going to sing a solo and said, we owe a debt of gratitude to our Jewish friends and neighbors. If it weren't for their defiance of a king back in the 2nd century BC, there would be no Christmas, no Bethlehem, no Christ. Because that was the devil's attempt to keep the Messiah from coming. So let's give our Jewish friends some applause for the Maccabees. And Michael Anatol, who was about to sing a solo, looked over and waited, and everybody bowed down and says, "You're welcome." Then, for the fun of it, the song he was going to sing was a Jewish song called Hine Matov. Hine Matov umanayim shevet achim gam yachad. How beautiful and wonderful it is for brothers to dwell together in unity. And it just so happens there's a Israeli messianic dance that goes with that tune. And I said, "Michael, which tune are you going to use?" He said, "The dance one." And Rabbi Lisa perked up, says, I know how to dance that. And I raised my hand. So do I. So, since I was going to play the bagpipes, Amazing Grace at the end, I was dressed in my kilt. And the rabbi, dressed in her pastoral garb, we got together and we danced Hinema Tov across the front of the church and up the aisle and back, while Michael Anatol was playing his guitar, singing it. It brought down the house. But you stop and think about it. There were Buddhists, Muslims, Catholics, Christian Scientists, Mormons, Adventists, Presbyterians, Baptists, Church of Christ, Disciples of Christ, all present, celebrating Thanksgiving together, which is the way it ought to be. But that's just me.
Was Dr. Miles Scott there, the dentist from that community?
I don't know his name. I've never met him.
I think he passed away.
That might be. If he did, he managed to do it before I knew him.
He had taught at Loma Linda before he moved.
And he's from Ventura,
He was just up the mountain from Ventura.
Ojai. Oh, I don't know that any Ojai folk ever joined us. Okay, well, it's time to close. Daniel 9 is tomorrow, or next week, I should say. And it is an incredible prophecy. It is totally shredded by some of our neighbors. And it's important for us to see how to answer them. Father, thank you for being our teacher and our guide tonight. We want to understand the lessons of the past. Because if we forget how you've led us in the past, we'll be afraid for the future. So, Father, thank you for keeping this history alive with its multi-layers of understanding and application. Thank you for all of this. In Jesus' name, amen. Next Tuesday, Daniel 9.